I first met you when John Williams told me about you. And you were doing a concert in the Globe Theatre in London.
Yeah, Some Wanamaker, 2014 it was.
That's right. And you were going to play the first half, and then John was going to play A Piece of Mine in the second half with ensemble. And John said, wouldn't it be fun if we got Matt involved and sort of added him to the ensemble? And that's kind of how it all started, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, it just it went down well. I enjoyed it. It was the Flower of Cities, and you wrote me a kind of a bridge passage, Cannon Street Bridge, and I improvised, and obviously did okay. No one threw anything at me, but then John, I think it really caught his imagination, and being the person he is who makes things happen, he commissioned you to write me a solo Theorbo piece.
He did, and it was a fascinating challenge for me because the Theorbo is so different from any other instrument I've ever written for. You know, it's not an instrument that really has many solos. I mean, there are a couple of quirky things from the late 16th century, Kapsberger and Piccinini, these kinds of people, the music that you play, but very little, and in fact, in the modern era, almost nothing.
No, and I think, how do you, obviously the people that wrote for the instrument in the 17th century were players, but as a guitarist, how do you kind of get your head around how to write for this instrument in an idiomatic way?
Well, the thing that was really surprising about it is because I've written for guitar so much and I know the instrument so well, I don't actually have to go really near it when I'm writing because it's very, very vivid in my imagination, my head and so on. But with the Theorbo, this re-entrant tuning thing was a bit much for me. So I decided what I would have to do is restring a guitar in the Theorbo tuning. So I took a standard guitar and tuned the 6 strings to the top 6 strings of the Theorbo, and spent a lot of time just improvising, sitting at home playing the guitar and sort of finding a whole wealth of harmonies simply by exploring. You know, a bit like the way some guitarists will take a kind of re-entrant tuning or a sort of unusual tuning and find a whole new world of harmony that way. So it was a real sort of voyage of discovery, and because it's a very unexploited tuning, there were lots of very obvious things that I could do that hadn't really been heard before. So it was a really exciting voyage of discovery, and very much sort of tactile fingers on, which is very unusual for me.
Yeah, and I remember from when you wrote The Miller's Tale, you sent things through and then I'd learn them and we'd get together and I would suggest things. When it came to the concerto, was there anything different in your mind? Because from my point of view, actually I found you were very, very specific about what you wanted. And I think we talked about the concerto for a long time. I think neither of us, we didn't know how it would work. I mean, you don't know until you try, and there's no historical examples to go off. So this was totally new territory. And we talked about the instrumentation, that it should be for strings, modern strings, and I had accidentally been improvising with a bass player, which I thought sounded kind of cool. So we knew we wanted a lot of double bass in there. But how did you, because it's not a solo piece, it's obviously you writing solo passages, but also textural things, and how did you just even start to approach such a fairly mammoth task?
Yeah, I mean, I've written a lot of concertos, and what sort of happened almost accidentally and because of fate, sort of over the years, is the soloists require their parts a long time before the orchestra require theirs. So often what happens is I'll sort of do all the solo parts very early on in the process and leave the orchestral parts quite sort of vague and just sort of sketched in. And then sort of really work on how the soloist is going to interact with the orchestra, what sort of part they'll have. But with the Theorbo concerto, because there are no models, there's no kind of Theorbo concertos of the past, and also it's not naturally an instrument you associate with playing sort of virtuosic solo music. So it was a question of thinking, okay, are there ways of using the Theorbo in combinations with other instruments in small groups, which could kind of replace the traditional cadenza? And that's when the idea of the 3 interludes came in, really. mixing the bass with the Theorbo was your idea, and it was absolutely brilliant. And it's really what makes the piece work, from my point of view, is that partnering with the bass and the Theorbo throughout the whole piece, either pizzicato or bowed bass. And then in the interludes with the sort of soloists from different sections of the string orchestra, a violinist, a viola player, and a cellist. But for me, the most exciting challenge was how you take an instrument that is so closely associated with very specific repertoire from a very specific time, and kind of make it an instrument which has some kind of history or relates to many different periods. So for me, the main challenge was to try and write something which reflected not only the time that Theorbo existed in, but a lot of other musical times since and before. So the piece kind of treated the instrument as if it was an instrument, yes, of the past, but also the present and even the future.